Terms for negotiating the exit of the United States. Well, after she correctly predicted the 2008 housing crisis, left Wall Street and went to work for the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas as an analyst, my guest says she was dismayed to find what she calls the liberal dogma of the unelected academics who have helped create a Federal Reserve that is too big to fight back for the little guy. Her name is Danielle DiMartino Booth. She's president of Money Strong LLC and author of Fed Up, an insider's take on why the Federal Reserve is bad for America. I sat down with her to discuss her perspective on where we stand now. Take a listen.
If somebody like Richard Fisher, who used to run the Dallas Fed, who I advised for years and years, if somebody like that tries to go up against this huge consensus, this vast majority, they're going to lose because they're going to be just one person. It doesn't matter if they're bringing up rational arguments saying, hey, wait, we could introduce distortions if we take interest rates to zero. We have a money market fund industry. We have a banking industry. We live in a capitalistic society. There could be really big issues if we take interest rates to zero. But if all of the PhDs in economics say you're wrong, it's our way or the highway, what are you going to do?
You know, in a lot of the documentaries people watch, just to bring it down to the lowest level
Sure.
for a lot of people here, it's that we see a lot of the PhDs and academics very elitist. These are very high-ranking Ivy League
we know best.
Professors who are looking down their nose and saying, you know, we know their demographic, okay? Usually older white men. Just going to put that out there because we know it's the truth. And they're making these decisions, and we see this lineup over and over and over again. How in the world do you break through that? What
really
administration
difficult.
is really going to come out and say, we're going to bring in that diversity again? Because that's something that really terrifies people when they hear stuff about this.
Oh, absolutely. Look, in the same way that the Congress was not willing to take Obamacare and put it on its own plate and eat it, in that same way, Fed officials have pensions for life.
I know.
So do they have to worry about a lifetime of working and buy junk bonds? These are the kind of decisions that the Fed forces people, everyday working people, to make, and they're ridiculous. But again, if you're not on the receiving end of the policy you make, you don't care.
You're not struggling with your mortgage, your grandmother is taken care of, your child isn't paying back student loans. Let's talk about December 8, 2008.
That's the day.
You talk about in your book, Fed Up, and that day...
How about the courage to sit tight and see how some of these policies play out? We don't need all these rounds of quantitative easing and all of these securities that the Fed bought and all the liquidity that you just mentioned flooding the system, because we don't know how that's going to play out. Today we have commercial real estate, stocks, and bonds pretty much at their most overvalued levels in history.
Right.
Because if you put too much money out there and it doesn't find a smart home, it's going to find a dumb home.
Well, let's talk about the savings stagnating. We look at retirees all the time. We look at millennials trying to save. Time is the best appreciation of wealth here, and time is not on their side when these interest rates are so low. You're lucky to get a savings account of 1%.
Very lucky,
now.
and that doesn't begin to keep up with inflation.
Absolutely
and
not.
That's the inflation that the Fed calls inflation. It's certainly not the 4 or 5% rental growth that most Americans consider to be the inflation in their life, because it's what they see. It's reality, as opposed to the...
Especially
it's insulting.
No, it is.
And if you talk, you know, it's interesting you bring up millennials and baby boomers.
Oh, yeah.
Because baby boomers are going to be forced at some point, right? They've already started to turn 70. They all started to turn 70 in 2016. They're going to need to monetize the value of their homes at some point.
And what are they going to get for that?
And the millennials have not been first-time home buyers when they should have been. When every prior generation of Americans has been buying their first home, they're struggling with that student debt that you brought up. So the question is, there's this big vacuum in between these two gigantic generations. Who's going to buy the baby boomers' homes? Not the millennials.
Well, and they can't necessarily inherit it, because it's this swirling vortex. And
well, the baby boomers' children aren't the millennials. They're me.
Well, yeah, exactly.
They're the Gen Xers.
It's mind-boggling.
It is.
Main Street is not doing well, and when we hear about these job numbers coming up and how, you know, we're hearing about, you know, the job numbers, the wages are going up, skilled workers are being hired. Those numbers aren't being felt on Main Street. They're still seeing their companies go abroad. They're still seeing wages stagnate.
They are.
How do you fight that with the Fed? We've heard Janet Yellen come out twice recently talking about raising interest rates. How are we going to proceed from here with these interest rate increases?
You know, I think it's really difficult to say. I'm going to get in the weeds here and just say, able to raise interest rates to where we need them to be for our retirees before we hit recession, and then they're going to try and take them down to zero again? Oh, I hope not.
And that's what you foresee. What about with this administration getting people in place and pushing forward? Are you at all optimistic about this new administration? And what would you have been thinking under Hillary Clinton? Let's look at that side of things too.
Well, with Hillary Clinton, I think we might have ended up with negative interest rates.
Yeah,
and we might have ended up eradicating cash.
That was a loaded question.
And she might have burned the book on the White House lawn. All kinds of possibilities.
Right.
So I was actually encouraged by the election outcome for one big reason. It's going to take somebody with no agenda to truly shake things up at the Fed. But he couldn't corral his own party, which we all know, which is why we had our TVs on mute for a long time. We all know that he couldn't corral his own party to pass healthcare legislation. That was just one special interest, one group of lobbyists. Tax reform involves all industries. So and you're telling me, I mean, right. So he's going to have to corral everybody, all. I don't know that it's going to happen. And the Trumponomics and the Trump trade and the huge 12% spike we've seen in the stock market since Election Day, that is very much at risk if people begin to lose faith in Trump's ability to deliver.
Well, and we saw a drop last Friday.
He's clearly capable of standing. Well, he can stand, he can tweet, but can he deliver? Well,
exactly. When that imploded at the Capitol last Friday, it's still very concerning. We saw a drop in the market.
Sure.
It had been on a rip since November. Mm-hmm. People like you are watching. Right.
After the next elections and destroying whatever he tries to accomplish.
How do you get this out to the regular people? Someone who might look at your book and say, well, I don't understand that, so I can't make it through it. How do you?
It's very simple. It was written twice.
Exactly. So you break it down for people. How do you convince them you've got to pay attention to this? Because health care is a concern. It has to do with the Fed. It has to do with your interest rates, all of it. Treasury. They're talking about upping the game. That's some pretty jocular verbiage from him. But what will the U.S. actually do if NATO doesn't promise to increase this spending? What can we do?
Well, not much. Right now, we know that President Trump, excuse me, President Trump said NATO is obsolete. He's walked back on those comments. We know we're not as serious about NATO like that anymore. But they're trying to make an effort here so that we can eventually get some. And the U.S. State Department is going about it is, let's go in with a strong face on and say pay up, or we're going to have a lot of negotiations.
Which is par for the course for them, because you talk strong, you win campaigns, and then we've got to face down these other member nations. But speaking of the spending, as you point out, the U.S. isn't.
Know that the U.S. government now wants to look into how much we spend on foreign aid, right? And they also want to boost U.S. military spending. So who's to say that if we're having all these borrowing issues that it wouldn't eventually impact how much we spend on NATO? I mean, that could end up being something that the Trump administration wants to cut.
It's a lot of posturing, but it's interesting to see this meeting finally coming about. He could not have been looking forward to it, but it's obviously a lot of bravado. But interesting to see how it'll all continue to come out in the wash.
We'll see.
All right, Boom Bust Bianca Ficini, thank you very much. Foresees dozens, if not hundreds, of repeat flights for a booster and a rocket turnaround of as little as 24 hours, perhaps by next year. This particular first stage landed on an ocean platform almost exactly a year ago after a space station launch for NASA. SpaceX refurbished and tested this 15-story booster, still sporting its 9 original engines. It nailed another vertical landing at sea Thursday once it was finished boosting the satellite for SES Company of Luxembourg. Its chief technology officer, Martin Halliwell, says this opens the door into a whole new era of spaceflight. Exciting stuff. That's all for now. For more from all of us here at Boom Bust, thanks for watching. See you next time.